way better. And so it was in either, good morning, Tim, how are you?
Morning, Tim.
And so it was either in Bratislava or Prague. Might have been it was probably in Prague, but he might remember. I also Helsinki, and then I went to one in Ottawa, which was hilarious because the games were going on, right? And in those world championships, they play in 2 or 3 different cities. And the rule with these coaching symposiums is they have to do them in English. Well, in Ottawa, they refuse to do it in English. So we all had to wear, the headphones and then they go, oh, wait, the Canadians are playing now. Okay, everybody time out for 3 hours. They shut the symposium down so they could all go watch the Canadian team play. It was like, oh, okay, this is fun. Anyways, to answer your question, that's how we met. And I don't know, I just, we've been in back and forth a little bit. I send him a thing. I'd ask him a question, and he'd send me a bunch of links to his postings. So, but he's a good guy. I like him. He thinks the way.
We're talking. Hi, Peter.
Good morning.
We're talking about Tom Malloy and how Hal got to know him years ago. And I think the International Coaching Symposiums, and Hal mentioned he was on the coin of Minnesota hockey, so he could go to them. Tom went on his own coin all the time, Hal.
Oh, geez.
I don't know that he's missed any, but
really,
sort of an icon in attendance. And the most recent one he's been, when there's people that instructed before, they always introduce him and make note of his presence and that kind of thing. But in Canada, Tom really was ahead of the time. And we weren't ready for him. And open-minded thinking. It was sort of like, oh, we don't do anything wrong in this country. And it's really interesting. Finally we're beginning to realize that we've got a lot to learn. And just on another topic, I'm peeking in and out watching Canada play Morocco in soccer this morning, and my God, we're getting schooled. It's quite unbelievable to see the difference in ball control, anticipation, possession, and it really is remarkable. And I thought even in the last game. So it's a great sport, and I'm sure glad we've got a group like this together. And I hope we get some Canadian guys on, but if we don't, that's fine too. But hell, Dan, are you? Can you say hello to us?
I most certainly can. Good morning.
Good morning, Dan. Now, Hal, have you met Dan before?
I'm not sure if I have or not.
Okay, Dan. Dan was on last week. Dan, I'll just get you to talk a bit about yourself and what you're doing. I believe in California, but I'm not sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm in San Diego, California. I am a 12UA youth hockey coach, and I am the director of coaching development and education for the San Diego Oilers.
Ooh.
I help our coaches get the resources they need to get educated. I'm also a contributing writer to the coaches site twice a month.
Well, Hal, I'm going to ask you a question that we'll see where this goes. When I checked your bio, much like older people on our site, we've got pretty long bios, but yours is one of the most impressive I've ever seen. So I'd like you to tell me a bit about your background. When you finished playing, where did you go? how did you get involved formally with coach education in Minnesota? And you spent a number of years doing that. And then now you're at the point where, like myself, you're just looking for things to do to stay active to help the game. So go ahead, Hal, tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Wally. So I'll give you the Cliff Note version, because as you met, the printed version's 3 pages. So I played high school hockey. I grew up in Minnesota playing outdoor hockey, pond hockey, but we only had a couple indoor rinks in the whole state. And so we're talking in the 50s and 60s. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
And then I ended up going to a boarding school in Colorado Springs and played hockey there. It was not Shattuck. But we had a pretty good team, because we had most of the kids were from Michigan, Massachusetts, and Minnesota. So we had a pretty good group of hockey players. And a guy named Murray Armstrong, who was the coach at the University of Denver, sort of recruited me to come to Denver as a walk-on, along with 2 other kids, another kid from Colorado Springs, and then a kid from Minnesota named Bobby Krieger. And when I got there, I realized that sometimes you end up getting recruited to a college, maybe because your GPA is so high, but the star players are so low and they need to balance. Well, that wasn't the case. What I had was an American passport, and Denver had won the national championship that prior spring with a 100% Canadian team, and Minnesota was threatening to drop them from their schedule. I didn't know any of this till a few years later. So when I started skating, I realized pretty quickly that I was probably player number 28 or 27, and I probably wasn't going to play hockey there. So I left Denver and went to the University of Minnesota to play. In those days, again, you were ineligible, but Minnesota had a JV team, and I ended up on the JV during the ineligible period and hurt my shoulder. Well, this was when checking from behind was highly encouraged, and got slammed into the boards, and my shoulder didn't take it too kindly. So I had to sit out for a while, and while I was out, a guy called and said, "Hey, we need help coaching a midget team." Midgets in Minnesota was U16, so you go from bantams to midgets if you weren't in high school. And I said, "Well, I don't know, I'll try it." That was in the fall of 1972, I think, and I've been coaching ever since. I really enjoyed it. I liked it, and so I did midget hockey for 6 years in 2 different places. And then I went into junior. I started a junior team, and we went twice to national championships, 2 of the 3 years out and the championships were out in New Jersey, which was interesting. Brian Mullen was on one of those teams. I think he ended up playing on the National Hockey League. His father was the Zamboni driver at the Garden in New York. But I just kept going, and I had a fair amount of success as a coach. And for a while I thought it was me, but it turned out it was just I had really pretty good players. And then I got kind of bored. I go, there's got to be more to this than how many games you win. And so I just started. I started reading as much as I could and going, and it was a little harder in those days, right? Because there was no internet. It was tough. I have the Russian hockey packet that I bought, the Can-Am hockey. Here it is. The Can-Am hockey had put together back in the early 70s. And I thought that was amazing. And so I got really curious about how other people play hockey and how to train hockey players. And then so it's like every decade something changes, the game changes, how you teach the game changes, the rules change, the players change, but the game doesn't change a lot. Being an athlete, hello, Sammy, the game doesn't change a lot, but the people who play the game change. And the coaches, the coaching strategies have changed, I think, for the better as years have gone by. And so there was a group of guys here in Minnesota that started a coach education program. And then when USA Hockey was headquartered in Minnesota and had one full-time employee, and they moved it to Colorado Springs because the Spencer Penrose Foundation, a guy out there, was going to give them free office space at the Broadmoor. And so I think two of them, I guess they had two employees, and they moved out there and started the USA Hockey home office out there. And these local guys, one is a guy named Dick Emmelheiser, and then another fellow, Bob O'Connor, who was with a number of our Olympic teams, and he was an East Coast Providence guy. He played on a line with Lou Lamoriello when he was at, I think, Providence College. And Lou was the general manager of one of the teams out there. Anyways, Bobby was a really good guy, but in those days, high school hockey was kind of the gig. And even though I'd been coaching in the United States Hockey League for 4 years, I did a lot of, I had a pretty good upward trajectory. I ended up coaching at the National Sports Festival in 1982. Lou Vero was the incoming Olympic coach after Herb Brooks. And that was all Division I players. We had 4 teams out there. And I had the honor of coaching the Midwest team. And so I kept moving my way up as a coach in terms of the types of players I was coaching and the quality of players. And I thought that was really lucky on my part because there wasn't any way I was going to end up coaching a national team because they give that to their college buddies to do. College coaches get those jobs in the United States, and our pro coaches do. I did realize when I was coaching the United States Hockey League, I was getting paid $5,500 for the season in a rental in a leased car, and so I had to have a day job, sort of like the old days in Canada. And you had to work in the factory and play hockey at night, and so I had to figure out what I was going to do with my life because I was in my early 30s, and I figured that hockey would always be here, and I better go get a job too, and make hockey my avocation rather than my vocation. So I went in the financial industry so I could go to the rink at 3 o'clock every day. And so that's sort of the short story. Along the way, I've ended up I was in the first sort of iteration of the coach education program in Minnesota, and then USA Hockey took it over. It was a volunteer program that was not required. And so it was a lot of fun, and they needed help. So I became an instructor running clinics. And then they changed it to the CEP coach education program. In the early 90s, they made it mandatory because, for a lot of good reasons. And also, I think from USA Hockey's point of view, it's very profitable. It generates about $1 million a year for them. And I was involved with it. I was in the very first group. They called it the Master Clinic. They now call it Level 5, and there were 20 of us in the group when we went to the training center in Colorado Springs. So all the top coaches from the United States, college coaches and pro guys came in. We were there for, I think, 5 days. It was really cool. And so, that was on my nickel. That was nobody paid for that. But as the coach education program developed, in the early 90s, I started doing that, and then I eventually ended up coach-in-chief of Minnesota Hockey on the board of directors for 8 years, I was also the head of the safety program, safety committee. And one of the things that I will remember forever as an accomplishment is that every time you guys put a helmet on, it's because of me. Because we did the research here in Minnesota. Every 6 days, a coach went down and had a serious head injury. And about every 7 or 8 years, a coach died, getting knocked down by players, typically younger ones. And when we did the research, it wasn't super scientific, but it was better than nothing. It was self-reported through 2 districts. And then we had a nurse follow up on the outcomes. It wasn't just coaches, it was players too. So we wanted to gather everything. And then we realized very quickly that the lower skilled players have way more injuries than the higher skilled players. And a lot of it was from body contact, especially at the Bantam and Pee Wee levels, because Pee Wee could still coach, have body contact. And the kids that couldn't skate very well, went down pretty hard and they got hurt a lot. We had a nurse follow up on all of these submissions to find out what the result was. We made a recommendation to Minnesota Hockey that they eliminate body contact at the C level and the B level, not the A level. I don't know if that was right or not. They didn't do it. But then right when we were in the middle of all of this, a coach got knocked down, coaching his 8-year-old. Had to have the helicopter ride to downtown Minneapolis to the Hennepin County Medical Center. Had his skull cracked open as he was going to die, and they saved him. His wife came to the board meeting in January with photos of her husband in his head shaved and the scar coming all the way around his skull, and then with all the restrictions he's going to have for the rest of his life. And by the time she got done, most everybody was in tears or close to it. And then the board, somebody made a motion that said coaches have to wear helmets on ice when they're on practice with their teams, and they got to buckle the chin strap, and they passed it. The Southern District of USA Hockey passed it at their next meeting, and then USA Hockey passed it at their summer meeting. They'd been trying to do it for a few years, but had gotten so much pushback. And I think one province in Canada was already doing it, and I think Canada did it after that. I was not even a voting member of it. I just gathered the information, but I had hate email for 2 years from coaches that didn't want to wear helmets and how horrible it was. And it was all my fault, which it wasn't. Well, maybe it was, I don't know. But I even had a guy tell me last year who was in our program, he played Division I hockey. He said, I was so angry at you. And then I got knocked down and hit my head. He says, I get it now. I get it. So if I've done nothing in the hockey world, I've saved a bunch of coaches from dying, and I've saved a bunch of coaches from having serious head injuries. So I don't know if that's anything. Well,
I did a camp. Well, I did a camp in I remember Michigan or something like that, and Wilkinson, an ex-NHL goalie, his dad died in Windsor. He got his kid. You know how they slide into the circle. Kid slid in and took the feet from under him, and But it was funny this summer. Hockey Canada. I went to the under-18 women and men, and the under-20, and no coaches were wearing helmets in Calgary at Winsport. It's a rule.
Here,
that is.
Yeah, in the United States, the rule was passed by USA Hockey, but the junior coaches don't have to wear them because they're professionals. That was the deal they cut with the junior coaches.
Well,
and high school coaches don't.
Coaches, but
yeah, high school coaches don't wear them here either. they get hurt. They get knocked down and or they get hit with pucks and get hurt. And so, anyways, so that Wally, that's sort of the short story. I have tried so many ways to help kids become better hockey players. I'm always trying. I tried the Billy Beanie's, the Swedish torpedo or whatever they call that thing. Well, Tom probably knows that. And I've tried so many different ways to help kids become not only better individually, but teams to play better, to play better hockey. And now I coached high school hockey for 15 years with mostly B-level kids in an A league. That was fun. I enjoyed it. I'm now coaching in a smaller association in the Twin Cities. And it's a wealthy suburb. So kids seem to disappear and go on vacation during odd times. Doesn't seem to be a strong commitment. I know it's good for kids to play other sports, but they're now playing way too many sports, and they all play. I mean, I've got 3 kids on my team. They're also playing. They're playing lacrosse all winter too. Because if they don't, they won't make the spring team. I mean, it's hard to compete with, and then their attention spans are super short, and so the kids we're dealing with are a lot different. One of the reasons that Wally asked me to get in to talk a little bit was I'd sent him some information about leadership and captains and how to pick captains and what the process looks like and what do captains do. And now I'm talking about, I mean, Sammy, you're running a team full of adults, or mostly adults. And I actually know a couple of the Whitecaps because they tried their hand at coaching and it didn't suit them very well, I guess. But this year, after we formed our team, I kept getting, well, how are we gonna pick captains, coach? How are we gonna pick captains? I go, well, how do you normally do it? Well, normally it's the coach's son, and you don't have a son on the team, so who's going to be the captain? That was their answer. And I said, well, we have to have a conversation about this because my experience, and I found this out quite a number of years ago, I've tried every possible way to pick captains. I've even had teams with no captains because it makes life a little easier, I think. Because if you get the wrong ones, it can be very divisive, and it can create some issues in the locker room at every level that I've been in. When I coached at the high school level, it was a private school. We had kids from 4 or 5 different communities, so they had their own tribe in the locker room. They wanted to sit next to each other. The kids from Maple Grove wanted to sit together. The Wayzata kids wanted to sit together. Whatever. And so I came up with a plan to have not only captains, but a leadership group. So we would solicit opinions from the players and who they respected. We would select a couple of captains, maybe a couple of assistant captains, depending what the team looked like and the ages and what the team was like. And then I would say to them, now, who else should we bring into this group? Because I use a book called the Team Captain's Leadership Development Manual by a guy named Jansen. And it's a book about this thick. It's actually kind of a workbook. It's really terrific. It's easy read. And it talks about leadership, basically, how to be a good leader and what your roles are. If you're a captain or a leader in your team, what's your relationship with the other players? What's your relationship with the coaches? And what's your relationship to the other captains or assistants? And it's really terrific. I've used it with the high school girls last year here, and the U15 girls before that too. They really, because most, so you pick a captain, and then what do you say? Well, what's the captain going to do? So if you put somebody in a leadership position, you ought to give them some guidance in terms of what's your role. So I had a kid one year. He was a captain, and he came into my locker room in like December, and he was a kid from a community called Minnetonka. And he said, "I can't be captain anymore." I said, "Well, why?" "Well, those kids from Maple Grove, they don't do anything I tell them to do." I said, "Well, why do you think you should be telling them to do anything? I mean, what kinds of things are you telling them?" And we talked about it. He says, "No," I said, "Hadley, you're a leader by example, not by, I'm the coach. I'll tell people what to do. Your job is to kind of keep peace in the locker room and identify when kids are if they're struggling a little bit. You're a senior, maybe put your arm around a 10th grader and help them understand how we do things here on our team." That's the kind of leadership that you should be doing. Now, I hadn't done the formal leadership training at that point, and that's when I decided I needed to do it. So even today with my Bantam team, the process got too many parents involved. So the leadership group is now 13 kids. But I told them that if you're in this thing, we're going to have 5 meetings. You've got to do the homework. You got to read the book. And so then I had to split it into 2 groups and cut the sessions down. I mean, these are 13 and 14-year-old boys, and one is a girl. And so almost the whole, well, not the whole, we have 19 kids in the team, so we didn't quite get everybody into it. But the others didn't want to be in it, which is fine. We have 2 captains, we have 2 assistant captains, and then we have all these other kids. And we read 2 chapters, and then they read them, and they write in their answers to the questions. It's sort of like, do they understand what the topic was about for the chapter? I also give them an assignment. I want them to go, and I think the book says, go interview a leader that you respect in your life. And that was a little hard for them. I said, "Well, how about your father or your mother? If they have, whichever one has a day job, they're probably in a leadership role of some sort. So get their take on what leadership means to them." But you can be a leader in your projects you do at school. You can be a leader at church, in your church groups. But you can be a leader by choice. And you don't have to defer to other people if you don't want to. And so the conversations are actually quite good. And to me, they read the book, and then I just have them tell me what they learned from the reading. And that helps me develop a better relationship with the players too. And also a better relationship with each other. So I don't think I'll ever go back to having a small group. I'm going to keep having it as a fairly large group of people, of kids that want to be involved in it. And so, as we have probably all experienced in our playing careers, we've played on teams that had great leadership, and we've played on teams that kind of neutral. If it's the best player on the team, they're not necessarily the best leader. They're not necessarily, will they be the best coach, a la Wayne Gretzky. where the game comes easy to somebody, it's hard for them to empathize with other players where the game doesn't come quite so easy. And so, but I don't know if this is the right way to do it, but this is the way I'm doing it now. And I think I've always said during the years, I wish I could give this to more kids. Well, now I am. And so I've evolved how I'm going. I think is it important? I don't know. It's one of those things that if 10 kids are involved, a couple of them will really grab a hold of it, just like anything else we do, right? But I've been through leadership training in my career, the financial industry. Companies are desperate for leaders. They're desperate for leaders, good leaders, effective leaders that inspire people and motivate them and get them going in all in the same direction. And in the business world today, they are desperate not only for leaders, but for female leaders. I don't want to speak for the female part of our population, but they don't tend to be leader. It doesn't seem to be very natural for a lot of the female players I have worked with to want to be in that kind of a role. There's a lot of reasons for it, but and some of them are good reasons, but some of them are, they're more. I don't know. I'm going to leave it at that. That's for people smarter than me. I know what the answers are, but I don't. It's not necessary to go there with this. So, but I think.
Hal, can I interrupt you for a minute? I've got a thought. The leadership book. If you could share with us in some way, send me an email, the name of the author and the actual accurate title. I just wanted to share with you, Alan Andrews, who's older than any of us. He is still coaching a novice team, but 5 years ago, he had them read a leadership book. And they have to write a summary of each chapter. He sent me summaries of that chapter. And he's teaching them to become entrepreneurs, independent for their decision making and doing service. So I just wanted to let you know that was going on. And then when you made the comment on females not wanting to be leaders, I wonder, Sammy, I don't know if we're going to open a can of worms here or not, but I always felt females are built for leadership because they listen. And guys who lead tend to talk too much. So, Sammy, I wonder if you have any comments or anything you want to ask or add from your perspective on the role of leadership and sure, bring up the roadblocks or the pitfalls of what females are facing.
Well, I certainly don't want to usurp too much of Hal's conversation because I'm really enjoying it. A couple things that surprised me so far is well, thank you first off for getting coaches to wear helmets. I think that's huge. I wore a helmet long before it was ever cool. And now it's just part of the game, which is great. And then the other thing was how much money that coach certification makes organizations. I never really thought about that, but that is a money-making endeavor. So 2 things. In terms of women in leadership roles, I think, I think both you guys are right. And I think that goes for men too. Some are wired that way and some aren't, but it is as equally prevalent in men and women, I think, as anybody else. I think what happens to people in maybe underserved populations, whether it is gender, whether it is sexuality, whether it is race, is often those people that are the minorities have never been placed in those roles. The expectations have been lower. all these things that I'm sure that Hal knows, that it is, there's a lot of reasons, and it isn't necessarily because women, are not wired that way or not great at it, because there's lots of women that are, so great at it. And, but it is, it's difficult in a sport like hockey to emerge into a leadership role. When you do, what I'm finding different now is that a lot of girls grew up playing girls hockey at a time when it was acceptable and there was no, there wasn't the stereotypes that perhaps existed prior. So those girls are emerging into situations with great coaches, with great leadership role models, and are emerging as leaders and, are doing an incredible job. The ones that made it through, I refer back to Thomas Pacina's conversation about women in the Czech Republic. The ones that made it through in maybe a male-dominated sport, it either made you just accept that you had to say nothing along the way in order to fit in, or it was the opposite, and you were, the verbose, talkative, extrovert out there. So I think we will see those roles change. I'm sure Hal has seen that change. I don't think that what Hal said was meant in any sort of discriminatory way. So don't worry. I know what you mean, and I know that we as coaches have that responsibility to ensure that all kids have that opportunity. Because Wally's right that there's, the listening skills that are so key, and the quieter ones sometimes can be a really great leader. They don't have to be the rah type situation. I'd be really curious to read the book. I was curious if it's Peter Jensen, who's the sports psychologist who wrote the book, or a different Jensen.
No, it's a different guy. I'll look it up here while we're chatting. But those are great comments, Sammy. And I had a Bantam team, the last Minnesota Bantam team that went to a Tier 1 national championships. And I think I've mentioned before, but Blake Wheeler, who's captain of the Winnipeg Jets, was on that team. There were two other kids that have been playing in Europe ever since. And they were all my captains. And we went to a ropes and ladders outdoor team building event, and I just watched all day. And there was a facilitator that ran it, and he said, what'd you learn by watching? I said, I got the wrong captains, because none of those three kids were good captains. They were selfish. It was everything's about them. And the best leader on the team was not a captain. We had one. Fortunately, we had one. And, he was kind of a third line defenseman. But everybody loved him and they listened to him, and he was motivational, and he helped solve problems in the locker room, because we had a few. When you have that, we not only had those kids that were great hockey players, we had two players on the team that ended up playing many years in the National Football League. And so that was a pretty talented group of kids.
Yeah, what I find difficult on my team with the Toronto Six is every single one of my players was an assistant or a captain on their college team, NCAA Division I. So I think also too, it's warranted to be said that every person plays a different role on a different team. Just because you're a leader on one team doesn't necessarily engender you to be the leader on the next team too, right? It's different circumstance, different people, different coaching staff, different way of communication. And some coaches are going to be able to communicate really well with that player, others are not. So yeah, I don't want to take up too much of Hal's time, and I know Tim has a question, so.
Before Tim, I'll make one other comment. I tell our players that everybody can be a leader in some way, shape, or form. And everybody has a role on the team. Whatever, if you aren't a goal scorer, and most kids aren't, you have to find a way to lead in other categories. Maybe you can be the number one in blocking shots. Maybe you can be the best at something else, and you can then encourage a couple of your teammates to follow your lead. And that's sort of that internal leadership rather than at the higher level. So we keep, it's just a work in progress for sure. Yeah. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Good. Thanks.
Yeah, just to put maybe a slightly different spin on the leaders, women and leadership. So I work for a rather large corporation here in the States, and just before our call started this morning, I got an email where the company has formed a new business segment, and they announced 13 leaders in that new business segment. 8 of those 13 are women. So I just think it's in the world today and in industry and business, without women, there's a huge vacuum in leadership. So any girl that can be placed in a leadership position on a sports team, I mean, I'd say put that on your resume, after college when you're it's just huge. Companies are looking for people that can work with people and lead them and set examples. So again, not hockey related maybe, but on the other hand, very much hockey related, right?
Well, I mean, we're trying to teach life lessons. I had a really great assistant coach last year coaching the JV girls team, and she had been a captain of the high school team, and she had played. I don't think she played in college, but she played some sort of a junior thing. And I would come up with an idea, and I'd talk to her about it. She'd go, "No, I don't think so." But she'd say, "Let's do it this way." And I go, "Okay, that's cool." So she was much more in tune with how the kids on the team, would react to something that I might want to do. And she said, "That's a good idea, but let's do it like this because I think it'll be better. It'll come better. It'll come off better, and we'll get better results." So I think that's amazing. I really have come to the conclusion, though, that for the most part, that we're not too far away from female teams being coached by females. And that's because the female game has grown so much that they're coming out of college and they're coming, we got the pros, and we got great role models for the kids. And I told Sammy I'm bringing my female goaltender to meet her February 28th when you're in town. So she's really excited. She was amazed. She's read about half the book, but she's just amazed at what you've accomplished. She's so excited. So she's a wonderful, wonderful young lady. So leadership. So I just think the world is waiting for all these female leaders to come out of whatever sports environment or whatever other environment they can, because companies want them, they need them on the board of directors, and they provide valuable insights. Tom raised his hand twice.
Well, I guess talking about female leadership, Wally says Cassie Campbell's the best leader he's seen, and she's coaching with me right now, and she's been great. I just want to comment that in '72 I was in Sioux City when you were talking about being in Denver, and I think Rich Preston was on that Denver team. I play hockey with him still.
Wow, cool. Well, I practiced with Denver.
Yeah.
I didn't get to the games.
Well, he said they were so good that he didn't play it. Well, the first year you couldn't play, and he said his second year hardly got on the ice, and he played NHL till he was 38. So it was a pretty good squad to break.
Yeah, I mean, they all lived in 2 houses with a Canadian flag hanging off the front porch on both of the houses, and I was down in the dormitory with everybody else.
Well, Sioux City, our coach was he'd been an assistant coach at Denver, and we had 4 players from Denver, so a little connection.
I have fond memories of playing in. Did you play in Sioux City up in the old auditorium upstairs?
Yeah, the dressing room was like above the stage. So it was like where the actors were ready for the presentation. So we had mirrors in front of us with lights in the mirror. We sat
Yeah.
in chairs, and then the announcer after every game would come, and he was a little wee guy, and he always wore these black gloves. And he walked around the room, and if he thought you played good, he shook your hand, and if he didn't, he walked by you. So that's how I just remember walking down those stairs. But anyway,
So that rink was about 160. It was about the size of a basketball court because that's what normally it did.
it was
And
like
also,
and there was nowhere to move, and the ends were like an egg. They weren't straight, and they were like an egg. So if you dumped it in, the puck went into the slot all the time. And it was just like you came out with there bruises.
I got a coaching lesson down there. The 5-goal lead with 5 minutes is not enough. And you know, if you played down there, I mean, when I coached there, was in the early 80s. I mean, God, all we did was fight the whole time. I mean, we'd fight after fight after fight. Oh my God. Then, you know,
US
then we'd have to go to the hospital after the game and everybody stitched up.
Yeah, I know. I got my nose put right on the side of my face. I was playing left wing and I chipped it by the D and he spun to the inside with his elbow. And my feet went, I think, parallel. And my nose was on the side of my face. He broke it in 5 places. So next day I had with the chopsticks up your nose and the pliers and everything to get it straightened out. But, yeah, there was a lot of contact there.
Hal, I'd like to talk to you a bit about leadership, and what you're doing is exceptional. We mentor more than, I mentor more than I coach. So I observe coaches, and I have been through mentorship gigs in the last 10 years where no coach I've coached, they need leadership education because they are undermining. The kids have more perception, appreciation of the dynamics of the team and how it's being handled. So the coaching leadership that I see is just shortening the bench and playing the best players and not dealing with issues consistently as a leader. In other words, a good player stays out too long or takes a bad penalty. It's not addressed consistently. And I think we're dreaming if we think adult coaches can do what you're doing because yours is a lifetime of experience and you were learning and you were open-minded learner to begin with. Mm-hmm. So here you are coaching and dealing with your small group. My position is more looking at all coaches and worrying about the game at all levels so kids get a better experience. Have you got any thoughts on that in terms of the surroundings you're in now, having been through it all?
Yeah, I mean, I only think about hockey 22 or 23 hours a day. And I have a lot of questions about it. And again, I feel really, really blessed to have been able, not only to be able to do it as long as I've been able to do it. And by the way, I also just signed up to do the deaf and hard of hearing team. I'm helping them also as their head coach. It's not a team, it's just a group, but it's eventually some of these kids will go to a national camp. But I digress. I was talking with a friend, and he might have joined us, but he's a great hockey guy too. And wondering about the stuff we want to teach kids right now. And I've come to the conclusion by the time they're Bantams, if they have missed this, and I coach now. I got this from somebody on this call: hard skills, soft skills, game skills. I split my practices up that way. The hard skills is skating, passing, those types of things, angling, body contact on the wall, all of that. Those are hard skills. Some body contact is also game skills, and then soft skills where we play small area competitive games with you can only hold the puck for 3 seconds. You can only shoot on a one-timer, and we change it all up, trying to put them in game situations to teach them, and everybody gets a lot of touches and so on and so forth. And as I watch kids, this goes all the way up to the National Hockey League. When you're under stress, you revert to the habits you developed when you were young. So when the Wild way back had a Stanley Cup run, they were fine until they got behind, I think, to get Vancouver, and all of a sudden they started taking slap shots again from everywhere. And they don't go in, right? I mean, one of them had a breakaway and took a slap shot, for God's sakes, missed the net from 30 feet out. And so I started going to games and tracking. If they took 15 or more slap shots, they lost the game. Under 15 slap shots, they won. Well, that tells you something, right? And I think our job, I'd like it to be my job, and I'm trying with my local program, is to redesign the program so we can teach kids what they need to know when they're sports. Because let's face it, and I don't know about Canada, but I suspect it's the same. Our program gets started, and they have this tryout thing in the fall, which I think is horrible. And then, kids get put on teams, and they go looking for coaches. And who ends up coach? Well, one of the dads of the kids on the team, which is fine. But then we don't give them any help. And they go to the USA Hockey money machine, and they watch all the videos, and they go to a clinic, maybe an in-person clinic. They watch my skating videos and that kind of stuff. So, but it's kind of all over the board. And then they come back and I think the rule of thumb is an inexperienced coach who played hockey will coach the kids the way he or she was last coached. So if the high school experience was that dad's or mom's last experience, they'll coach a sport team exactly the same way, because that's all they can remember how to do. And nobody's taught them about teaching skating. And one of the things I find very interesting here, even in Minnesota, is of the kids I have, which are, let me say, the 17 skaters, we do 20 minutes of skating every practice. Power skating, edge work. And as the season progresses, it gets harder. We layer on more and more stuff as they met. Not one of those kids has ever had any skating instruction whatsoever. And they're 14 years old. They've never had a coach do that. What do? Power play, penalty kill, breakouts. That's what most kids get. One of the things I can tell you, if you do the skating stuff, Sammy, you're probably experiencing this with your daughter. Is it right? Your daughter that's playing now? They get better every time they get on the ice. The hearing impaired and the deaf kids, a couple of them are adults, every time we're on the ice and we get done, they're better at the end of the session than they are at the beginning of the session. Because they're getting skating instruction and they're getting immediate feedback. Bend your knees, get your butt down, push and glide. Oh, you can't stop? Okay, let's go to the wall and work on and so, but most kids, at least down here, don't get that kind of coaching. No, because coach, we got a tournament this weekend. We got to get ready for the tournament. They play 60, 70 games at Pee Wee's, and they practice maybe 30 times. And so that to me is kind of discouraging. I want to do sort of a coach university for the coaches in our program. I did a session like this. And again, I tried to figure out, I've had a lot of success as a coach. My teams have had a ton of success, probably an 80% win thing, which is pretty high. Great players. But again, my high school team did not have great players and had a lot of success. We didn't win the state tournament, but we beat, we probably had we played 25 games and we were between 17 and 19 wins every year, but we couldn't win in playoffs occasionally because we just didn't have enough depth. But, why? Why does that happen? Well, it's because the environment we put them in and the things that I did to help them become better hockey players and to get them to come together and play. And I spent years trying to figure out why my teams played so well, because I just didn't, and then I ran across a book, The Double Goal Coach from the Positive Coach Alliance. It's a great book. And they now have a nonprofit and they go out and they're into making money doing these clinic stuff. And I worked with them for a while. But there's some great things in there, but I also realized that the guy named Jim Thompson from North Dakota, and then he went out to Stanford and he wrote this book, and it's a wonderful instruction for coaching, how to coach. And I realized that reading it, I already knew most of it, except he just wrote it down in a way that was organized. I didn't know all of it, so one of the things I do that I got from there is we do a winner's circle. At the end of every practice, we do something called winner's circle. We bring all the kids together, and they take, and I would say, who noticed one of your teammates doing something really great in practice today? Okay, and this comes from the research that to be an effective teacher, your positive to negative feedback is to be 5 to 1 positive to 1 negative. Well, coach can't do 5 to every player, but players can do it to each other. And to me, it's more of it becomes just part of the environment. It's part of what this team does. And I mean, the Chicago Bulls do this when Jackson was coaching there. Now, obviously, he had some pretty good players, with Michael Jordan and but those guys all did this, right? And now I started doing this when I was coaching high school, and I brought it over to the girls. Now with the girls, I had to allocate more time at the end of practice because they all wanted to do it. They all wanted, and the boys, it takes half as much time, although they're starting to kind of get into it. And if I forget, they go, coach, we got to do winner's circle. Oh, okay. We do that. We also do, we do push-ups at the end of practice. And the first day we do 1. The second day we do 2. We're up to 20 now. I said, should we go back down? Oh, no. Let's see how high we can get. And they have to do them, one guy leads and they get in the circle, and they have to, they got to do it in sync. It's a team event. They want to do all this stuff. I think it's just crazy, but I like it. It's fun. So you can do leadership stuff, Wally, in all sorts of different ways. And part of, I think, the winner's circle is putting some responsibility on them to acknowledge teammates who are really doing some great things. And as the season goes along, it'll get a little more sophisticated, perhaps. And the next level of that is, and I'm going to tell them, is why wait till the end of practice to tell a teammate he did something really great? Why don't you do it during practice? When he comes back into the lineup or so, say, hey, that was really cool. It was really cool because I tell the kids that hockey is a constant feedback game. Every time you're on the ice, you get feedback, positive and negative, and most of it's negative. Every shift is mostly negative feedback and occasionally positive. And positive is when the puck goes in the net, in our net, in the other team's net, not our net. But you're getting feedback constantly, so you have to be aware of it and you have to accept it and take it in and learn from it. It's just the way life is. So let me see. Dan, did Dan want somebody else want to? Dan, did you want to talk? No? Okay.
Yes, sorry. I just put food in my mouth.
I want to make a comment while Dan's just eating. I can tell that Tom is also watching the game at the same time. So Canada is playing Morocco in World Cup soccer right now, and I feel like some of us have it on in the background still listening, and Canada just missed. So I just want to, if we happen to be like this, I just want to let you know that
2-1 now.
It's 2-1, but Canada just put a header off the post.
Okay.
Anyways, I digressed. That sometimes I'm super excited about what you're saying though too, Hal.
Okay,
and I can see Tom do this.
Hell, I had to walk out. I got my coffee and just saw the score because the giveaway on the first goal in the first 5 minutes, the goalie just kicked it indiscriminately up the field, and they received the ball and kicked it into the net. So I'm sort of psychologically torn, trying to figure out whether they're that good or we're that bad. So, anyway,
but I did want to say, Hal, I love that leadership circle idea. What a great idea! I saw that happen in Ultimate Frisbee. They do that, and they do that at the end of every. It's like in the rule book. You have to do that, but you include the other team too at the end of the game. And you have to say either something on your team or something about the other team. I just saw like a 10-year-old ultimate game happening. And so there's no coaches leading it. It's just the kids. It was really amazing to see.
I think that's cool. When I was in high school, which was in Colorado, the teams did not shake hands at the end of the game. They went to their locker rooms, and the winning team then went and visited the losing team in the locker room and walked around and shook hands, which I thought was really quite interesting. I'm not a big fan of the handshake on ice after games in youth or juniors, and because they're not sincere for the most part, especially with teenage kids. It's just a good game, good game, good game, good game. They don't, and I try to teach the kids, slow down and look them in the eye. And when I notice a really good player on another team, or if their goalie played great, if we're shaking hands, I'll hang onto it and I'll say, "You had an awesome game tonight, son. You really played well. You're quite a hockey player." And I said, "Good luck in the rest of the season." So you can take this stuff out beyond your own team and do that. The year before the pandemic, my high school team, we had to cancel 4 games because I had 8 kids that were homesick for like 10 days. Now, was it COVID? I don't know, but in those days they called it flu. But it was pretty close to when COVID officially showed up. And but I had suggested to our opponents when they played us that after the national anthem, everybody turn on the blue lines and one player go across and you just, with your glove on, knuckle bump one other player, and that's it, and no handshakes at the end of the game, because that's a petri dish just waiting to happen, right? Except for the kids that didn't play, their hands are cold and dry. But and everybody thought that was crazy. Okay, well, I've been called worse things, and because I just didn't seem to think it was, it's like "have a nice day" when you go to the gas station and the kid says "have a nice day," as you walk out. There's nothing sincere about any of it. It's just kind of a showy thing. The National Football League games are over and you can see all the players on both teams, they're all friends and they're hugging each other and giving each other a hard time a little bit. I think that's great sportsmanship. Hockey doesn't do it until you're eliminated for the season. And then they handshake. And colleges don't do it until the end of the series, I think. Or maybe, I don't know. So I'm always trying to think of ways to make the experience of playing hockey more valuable than just playing hockey. And build relationships. And I'll go back to saying, when I found that book, it helped me understand why what did I do works. And it must be uniquely me, but it isn't because I'm a smarter hockey coach. I think it's because of the relationships I build with the players. Not only as a team, but individual relationships. Now, I've had problems with some kids. I've got one right now. And I'm struggling with how to deal with him. And whether I want to go through the, I mean, every coach that he's had has told me, good luck. So now I have to decide if I want to invest the time or if I'm just going to pass him on. His competitive playing career will be over after this year. So how much time and energy do I want to spend with sort of, I don't want to call it fighting, but working with this young man versus the rest of the team, because that can detract from the team quite a bit. And so I'm thinking about that. Not sure what I'm going to do about it yet. But it's having had the opportunity to coach kids from the freshman level all the way down to squirts. I refuse to go lower than that because that's kind of daycare. What
age is squirts? You guys use different?
Yeah, at 10 and 9. Okay. So USA Hockey uses, we had like mites and squirts and peewees and bantams and midgets. Now we just do 8 and under, 10 and under, 12 and under. USA Hockey does that. Minnesota's still calling them, by those somewhat derogatory names. I mean, a bantam is a chicken, and we know midgets is kind of derogatory. Squirts isn't quite as derogatory, and mites, I used to say that because they might skate and they might not. I don't know, but MITE is a little tiny thing. We all have them all over our face. We just don't know it. So they're migrating away to just because in the girls' game, female game, they never use it. They use U15, U14, U12, U10, whatever. Then you knew on the schedule that was a girls' game. Well, now it's going to be, the boys are going to be the same also. What do you guys do up there, Tom?
We've gone to that too. So I'm coaching the U13 girls.
Yeah.